Okay, so hello everyone. So welcome again to our subject or our course, Understanding the Self. Our topic for today is about self in Eastern and Western thought. So few weeks ago, we already studied self in philosophical perspective, self in sociological perspective, and self in psychological perspective. So for today, we will know the view of various philosophers from East and West regarding the self. However, the main focus of our lesson for today um, largely um, however, the focus of our lesson for today is more on Eastern thought about self because our lesson about philosophical perspective of self is more on West thought or Western perspective few weeks ago. So let's start. Okay, so regarding East and West thought, the East pertains to Asian thought or Asian philosophies about self, while West pertains to the regions of North America and the continent of Europe. So let us first define what is Eastern philosophy. In Eastern philosophy, the self is often treated as an illusion. The self is an idea that people are separate entities from each other and the world is not considered a reality in Eastern thought. So, in Asian perspective, they considered self as an imaginary perspective because they are more concerned about the concept of collective self. Have you heard the word collective self? So later on, we will define what is collective self. But Asians or East people um, highlights the concept of collective self, and they believe that it is more important than individual self. Collective self is a person's concept of self within a group, such as group based on race or gender. And later on, we will more expound about that. Collective self, these are individuals establish strong bonds, particularly with their families and bound by the culture or culture of the group. Meaning to say, students, collective self is the version of yourself when you are in a group. Okay? So in psychological perspective, we studied that we have various versions of ourselves. And also in sociological perspective, in looking glass theory, so we are changing ourselves based on the people that we meet and based on the people or the member or based on the people or the member of the group we are in. Okay? So when we are in school, where we are in our house, we're with our friends, when we are with other people, or when we are in other places, we are changing ourselves. We are changing the things that we show to other people or the self that we show to other people. While in Western philosophy, people are separate and unique from each other. What one person does or experiences is completely independent of other people and the world at large. Meaning to say, if the Eastern philosophy about self highly focus on collectivity or collective self, the Western philosophy or the West highly um, the Western philosophy highlights individuality or the individual self, does not discount the role of environment and society in the formation of the self, but focus always looking towards the self. So Western philosophy um, signify specific concept of self, which is individuality. Or in short, they highlights the individual self rather than society, rather than groups. Individual self goes into the world with the intention of living the life that he chooses, making decisions, acting upon it, and taking responsibilities from consequences. As you can see in the picture, it highlights one person among others. Individual self highlights one unique side. It consists of attributes such as traits, goals, aspirations, experiences, interests, and behaviors that differentiate a person from others. Meaning to say, the West highlights specific behaviors and specific skills and traits of every individual, while the East highlights the performance, behavior, and attitudes of people within a group or as a group itself. So, meaning to say, ang East ay nag-highlight ng kabuuan, while the West they value individuality o nag-highlight sila ng strength at ng characteristics ng every individual or every human being in this world. So in this slide, I summarize the differences of concept about self of East and West, or East philosophy and Western philosophy. So Western philosophy highlights individualism. School of thought from Greek philosophy. Largely, it started from Greece. While in Eastern philosophy that highlights collectivism, it is highly based on Asia and more specifically in Chinese philosophy or in Chinese region. Western philosophy takes roots from Rome and Christianity, specifically Judeo-Christianity or Latin areas. So, aside from Greece, West philosophy flourished in Rome and other parts of Europe and other parts of America. While Eastern philosophy take its roots from the philosophies and religion of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, which is we will discuss later in this lesson. Western philosophy, the main principle of this is self-dedication or self-individualization. While Eastern philosophy, main principle is unity or collectivism, unity or collectivism. While Western philosophy focus on ethics or morality, while Eastern philosophy highlights the tribes on virtues and values. They highlight virtues and values. Of course, Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy rooted or emerged because of their Western culture and Eastern culture. In Western culture, it looks the world in dualities wherein you are distinct from the other person's creator is separate from the object he created, in which self is distinguished from acknowledgement according to Walter 2012. While in Eastern culture, which is the basis of Eastern philosophy about the self, sees the other person as part of yourself as well as the things you may create, a drama in which everyone is interconnected, which there's specific roles according to Walter 2012. So in Western culture, they highlights the strengths and skills and traits of every individual. So they value individual strength and individual knowledge. While in Eastern culture, they more highlight the strength of groups. They more highlight the connectivity and connected of every individual within a group or within the society or within the community. First, we will go to or we will discuss Eastern philosophies that highlights various ideas about self, and later on at the latter part of our discussion, we will discuss some ideas about self based on Western philosophies. So there are various Eastern philosophies that emerge in Asia, particularly in South Asia and East Asia. So first, we will discuss Buddhism. What is Buddhism? Based on our basic knowledge about Buddhism, we usually heard Buddhism as a influential religion in Asia, particularly in some parts of South Asia and Southeast Asia. At first, um, it was a philosophy of a human, of a person, but because of the values and because of the good teachings of this person, later on, it became a religion. So, what is Buddhism? Buddhism is a religion based on the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama. That is the founder of this religion. He became Buddha, or he came to be called Buddha. Buddha means the awakened one or the enlightened one. He was called Buddha after he experienced a profound realization of the nature of life, death, and existence. In English, the Buddha was said to be enlightened, although in Sanskrit it is Bodhi, meaning the awakened or the awakened one. Siddhartha Gautama, popularly known as Buddha, he lived in ancient India around 5th to 4th century. He is the founder of Buddhism. The enlightened one or the awakened one is the one who discovered the ancient path to release cravings and escape the cycle of birth and rebirth. Since Hinduism believes in the concept of reincarnation or the life after death or the cycle of life and death. Buddhism is a Eastern philosophy. In Eastern philosophy, the self was rooted from people's own experiences in life and in the common experiences with the world, with their family, and with their society. Also, Eastern philosophers believe in philosophical ideologies that had been inspiring billions of people around the world from ancient times up to the present. So this is Buddha. And at present time, Buddhism is a large religion in Asia and in the world. Siddhartha Gautama Buddha developed the doctrine called anatta, often defined as no self, or the principle that nothing is permanent and that no one is independent entity, as we are all part of the collective whole. So the belief of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha is an example of belief about collective self rather than individual self. Buddha also believes that the self is not permanent. That's why he called it no self. There is no permanent self. In his theory of no self, Buddha suggests that self was born into this world, then the self will grow and exist, then the self will die. So there's no such thing as actual permanent self. He believed that in this world, there are continuous changes, physical and emotional self change, and we change from time to time. The yesterday version of ourselves is not anymore the present version of ourselves today. Also, Siddhartha Gautama doesn't believe in material self because He believes that material self is not important. What is important is how we respond to the world and how we choose and decide in this world. Buddhism also believes that suffering is part of life and we must not totally deny ourselves, but this actually means we have to detach ourselves from our own selfish desires. Because according to Buddhism, human and selfish desires are the root of all evilness in this world. So we must develop ourselves and we must not believe in ourselves. He believes that self is an imagination or just an illusion. Next, the second philosophy or Eastern thought about self is another religion which is Hinduism. Hinduism is a large religion originated also in South Asia, particularly in areas around India. Hinduism is the world's oldest extant religion or existing religion. Hinduism makes up 80% of population of India. Hinduism is a polytheistic religion or is a type of religion that believe in many gods or gods and goddesses. They also believe in reincarnation or the concept of rebirth of souls after death. They also believe in the concept of karma or the moral consequences of people that when you do good, good things will happen. When you do bad, bad things will happen to you. Hinduism believes in the concept of universal self. Hinduism also believes in the concept of atman. What is atman? Atman means eternal self. It refers to the real self beyond ego or false self. It is also referred as spirit or soul. It also indicates our true self or essence which underlies our existence. Atman basically involves the idea of the self as a spiritual rather than material being. Therefore, Hinduism emphasizes detachment from the material world and promotes practices such as asceticism, identical with the eternal core of the personality that after death either transmigrates into a new life or attains release or the moksha from the hands of existence. It could be said that in this world, a spiritual being, that man, has a human experience rather than human being having a spiritual experience. Atman also refers to the non-material self, which never changes. It is distinct from both mind and the external body. The real self, according to Hinduism, is temporarily designations. They believe in ideas of reincarnation and natural existence. The most important concept of self of Hinduism is the real self is distinct from the temporary body. Also, a spiritual and disciplined self will release the true self. Next, the third Eastern thought or Eastern philosophy that shows concept or ideas about self no other than Confucianism. What is Confucianism? Confucianism, founded by Confucius. Confucianism taught codes of conduct of living in peace and harmony. Mainly, the teachings of Confucianism highlights proper social behavior and other concepts of social and filial piety. Also, Confucianism believes that People must show proper behavior and ethics all the time. One of the famous concept of Confucianism about family and government is let the ruler be a rule, the minister be a minister, the father be a father, and the son be a son. Confucianism highlights family values and the importance of participation in society and government of every individual as a whole. The teachings of Confucianism were founded in six classics and analects. These are the writings of Confucius. And this is the illustration of Confucius. Who is Confucius? Confucius was also called as Kung Futsi or Kung Futse, or he is also called as Master Kong. But in English, he is Confucius. Confucius was a Chinese philosopher and considered traditionally as the paragon of Chinese sage or sages. He is also widely considered as one of the most influential individuals of human history, especially in Chinese history. Confucius was born around 551 BCE or before Common Era. He was born in the time wherein Chinese dynasty was declining, so his teachings were more on the development of the self. His teaching was more on helping people and how to become ethical, and also his teachings were focusing on how would the self develop a good members of society. The main concepts of Confucianism, the core of Confucianism is humanism. The belief that human beings are teachable, improbable, and perfectible through personal and communal endeavor, especially including self-cultivation and self-creation. Also, Confucianism highlights the self-cultivated self. The identity of self-concept of an individual is interwoven with the identity and status of his or her community or culture, sharing its pride as well as failures. Self-cultivation is the ultimate purpose of life. According to Confucius, we must always develop ourselves and we must always show virtue and values, not just with ourselves but also with other people in the village or in the community or in the society we are living. That is the meaning of a self-cultivated self. Chinese philosophy believe that self is connected with society. Basically, this is the nature of the self, that we are connected with our family and with the village community and definitely the society we are living. Whatever we do, it reflects and affects to our community. So it stress the communal aspect of the self. That is very Asian. Lastly, Confucius believed that there is always interconnectedness in society and in the self, vice versa. That's why Confucius emphasizes the significant role of the environment and in the family to the development of the self. He highly he highly focus on the cultivated self. Also, Confucius believed in individual identity that misidentified by members in the reference group which belongs to relational self. Also, Confucius believed in the subdued self. It is a concept wherein the self is contained to respond to the perceptions not of its own needs and aspirations but of social requirements and obligations. He also believed in the concept of ren or human heartedness. Confucius believes that we must always be kind with other people. Ren is a Confucian virtue characterized by altruistic behavior that must be nurtured in every person. Lastly, the concept or the Eastern thought of Taoism. Sometimes it is called as Daoism. It is the wisdom of nature. What is Taoism or Daoism? It is founded by Lao Tzu or sometimes called as Lao Tse. The sacred text of Taoism is Tao Te Ching, like the Analects of Confucius in Confucianism and like the Bible in Christianity. The meaning of Tao Te Ching is the book of the way. The major teachings of Taoism is living in harmony with nature. According to Lao Tse, we must be like water because the water goes with the flow, but it is unstoppable or inevitable. Lao Tzu, Lao Tzu or Lao Tse, also called as Old Master because that is the meaning of Lao Tse and Lao Tzu. He lived during the warring states of China of the 4th century. He believes that the nature and the self are interconnected. It means the self is part of the universal web of existence, and these things are interconnected to each other. So whatever the self is done, it always reflects towards the connections of existence you know. And it also believes that the self is related to society. That's why, just like Confucianism as a Chinese philosophy, Taoism also highlights the implication of our behavior to our society or to our government. So this is Lao Tzu. That's the picture or statue and other depictions about Lao Tzu. In Taoism, they have idea about the self, which is the self is not just an extension of the family or the community. It is part of the universe. One of the forms and manifestations of the Tao or Tao means the way. Taoism also believe that man is part of nature, and he also suggests that the man must follow the way of the Tao, following the way of nature. We must not do or act selfless and selfishly towards the destruction of the web of existence, because the man gives destruction to nature and the nature can also give it back to man. Taoism emphasizes living with harmony with the Tao or the way or path. It is the religion and philosophy at the same time. Tao is nothing but the expression of the unity of the universe and the path which human beings must take to preserve the unity. Tao is also the core of concept of Taoist beliefs and practices referred to as to the life force that surrounds the flows through all living and unliving things and that balances orders, unifies, and connects them. Also, Taoists regard the human body as the miniature of the universe as an extension of the cosmos or the universe, according to Ho 1995. Going against the will of nature or the universe, disrupt the cosmic order that symbolizes the yin and yang, the good and the bad. That is the end of Eastern thought about self. We will now go to Western thoughts. While we are in philosophical perspective of self, we studied various concepts of self based on the ideas of various Western philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, Rene Descartes, David Hume, Immanuel Kant, so on and so forth. So we will just mention today and discuss a few famous Western individuals who value certain ideas about the concept of self. About the concept of self. Let's start. What is the meaning of Western thought? Western thoughts conducted scientific investigations in the effort to understand the self and have developed theories and difference among them. So the Eastern philosophy highlights values and virtues in artistic way, while Western thoughts conducts studying about self in scientific way. Western thoughts emphasize the importance of scientific methods of investigations to provide satisfactory answers to understanding the self. So, more on scientific methods ang way ng mga West to understand individuals, to understand the concept of self of human beings, rather than artistically explaining and defining the concept of self, just like the Eastern philosophers' way. So, medyo methodological ang mga West. Western thoughts emphasize the importance of scientific method and investigations to provide satisfactory answers to understanding the self. Also, they emphasize the individualistic rather than the relational self or the collective self. The Western concept of self highly started in Greece. That's why ancient Grecian philosophers see humans as bearers of irreplaceable values. So, as time goes by, marami na rin mga Western philosopher ang nag-emerge, just like in medieval period and Renaissance period. One of these is Saint Thomas Aquinas. Who is Saint Thomas Aquinas? Saint Thomas Aquinas is a very famous person in history. He is an Italian philosopher. Thomas Aquinas was an Italian Dominican friar, philosopher, Catholic priest, and doctor of the church. An immensely influential philosopher, theologian, and jurist in the tradition of scholasticism. He is also known within latter as the Doctor Angelicus and Doctor Cumanis of the church. He was born in 1225 in Roccasesa, Italy, and he died March 7, 1274 in Italy. He is also called, or he was influenced by Saint Augustine of Hippo, Aristotle, and Plato and Socrates, meaning he read their works and his idea about self was influenced by them. So, St. Thomas Aquinas believed that the body constitutes individuality. The individual was the focus of the Renaissance thought. St. Thomas Aquinas begins his theory of self-knowledge from claim that all our self-knowledge is dependent on our experiences of the world around us. St. Thomas Aquinas argues awareness of ourselves is triggered and shaped by the experiences of objects in the environment. In short, St. Thomas Aquinas highlights individuality and acquisition of knowledge throughout our lives. He also believes in self-knowledge and the development of the mind. Next, another modern one, we have Frank Johnson. Who is Frank Johnson? Frank Johnson is an American psychiatrist and professor. In 1985, he outlined four categories on how the term self used in contemporary Western discussion. So, he discussed four categories on how the term self and how he defined self. He also describes Western self as an individualistic self that is deeply aware of itself, uniqueness, sense of direction, purpose, and volition. Analytical, individualistic, monotheism, and materialistic are the four categories of self of Johnson. Analytical self means the tendency to see reality as an aggregate of parts, The self is an observer, separate and distinct from external objects, me versus others. While individualistic self is the quality of Western thinking when self-expression and self-actualization are important ways of establishing who one is, as well as finding satisfaction in the world. Monotheism self or monotheistic self, according to Johnson, involved the tendency toward unitary explanations of phenomena and closed system view of self, modeled after unitary omnipotent power, based on the religion of monotheism, which is they believe in one God. While the last one, materialistic self, tends to discredit explanations that do not use analytical and deductive modes of thinking. So last, what are the differences of Western versus Eastern thoughts about self? Based on dimensions such as frame of reference, example of school of thought, and belief system. Western thoughts, in Western thoughts, there is a separation between philosophy and religion and spirituality kasi scientific way ang pag-aaral nila ng self. While Eastern thought, they highly focus on religion and philosophy. Naging intertwine, no? Parang naghahalo na yung religion and philosophy just like in Eastern philosophies or Chinese philosophies. Example nito ng Western thoughts ay scholasticism, rationalism, empiricism, yung pinag-aralan natin last time, kila David Hume at Immanuel Kant kung saan they value experiences and they believe when they see it and they feel it in real life. Phenomenology. In Eastern thought, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, the religion philosophy that we mentioned a while ago in Eastern philosophy. In source of knowledge, in Western thought, he made use of reason rather than faith and pursue wisdom. Naka-highlight sa acquisition of knowledge rather than sa values and religious belief ang West. While sa East, may trust sa intuition is often associated with the religious beliefs of those persons that we mentioned a while ago. In notable philosophers sa West, nandiyan si Socrates, si Plato, Aristotle, René Descartes, and John Locke na pinag-aralan natin sa philosophical basis o philosophical perspective ng self. While sa Eastern thought, famous Siddhartha Gautama, also called as Buddha, Confucius, and Lao Tzu. Last one, in modes of cognition, in Western thought, analytical and deductive ang way nila, forms of scientific methods or scientific way. In Eastern thought, synthetic and inductive. Whilst they have emphasis on distinctions and oppositions, sa Eastern thought naman, commonalities and harmonies. That's why individualistic ang approach ng West, while collective naman ang approach ng East. Sa view sa self, egocentric ang West kasi individual self ang hina-highlight nila, while sociocentric o social self and collective self naman sa East. Sa view nila sa universe and life, linear o isang diretsong linya lang ang sa West, then sa East naman ay circular o umiikot sa iba't ibang mga tao, umiikot sa nakararami o sa group. The East highly promotes strong public image while the West promotes expression of uniqueness of each individual. The East highly focus the tight societies and emphasize public and communal aspects, while the West focuses on complex individuality of people and flexibility to gain knowledge with various range of choices and ways. So, what are the similarities of Western thought and Eastern thought? Of course, if there are differences, there are also similarities. They define and they highly focus on higher beings and how these beings affects us as human beings, and they have deeper understanding of reality and how humans define self in their own ways. So that is all for today. Thank you so much for listening to our lesson, Self in Eastern and Western Thought. Thank you. Have a nice day.